Let's welcome back center stage, the Hasegawa Mechatro project. These are great models if you've never weathered mecha before. And the reason is they really cross over that boundary between current civilian and construction equipment type conversation and into robotic mecha bipedal machine conversation. What I did was I kind of up detailed the model a little bit, add some rubber power cables, some Kotobukiya joint parts, MSG little pipe connectors, if you will. Kind of detail out the arms, kind of detail the model up a little bit, next level, added some markings, did some decals. Some of this is spray mask, some of this is markings, stuff like that, just to get this model a little bit further along. And of course, it's all done on the live streams too, so you guys are welcome to check that out at length if you want to watch those one-to-one. We finished off with the legs last time, the left leg in particular, and the left arm manipulator, in the power loader arm in particular. And this is the power loader kit, just to refresh you guys. And the paint job is the colored plastic, so there's no paint on this. What we've done before, again, to refresh you guys, is we put a clear primer down, and then I put down a layer of an acrylic matte coat to prep the surface for oil paints. But before we get to that, let's get the right arm up to snuff and add some rust layering onto that, because it's all gonna be an additive process. First thing I gotta do is get everything kind of set up and prepped. The oil paint palette there is ready to go. Let's get the paint ready. This is the Life Color Rust Set. These are heavy, extra pigmented paints, which I've talked about before. Put a little diluted, add a little water for dilution there, and we're gonna use some sponges to apply the rust in layers from light to dark. Packing sponges, electronic load sponges, whatever, any type of sponge like this will work fine. The key to this, though, is the real trick to all this, in particular. Anytime you're doing something that's similar to what is kind of the general conversation of dry brushing in a form in kind of its various iterations, if you will, because this is literally kind of a layered dry brushing approach. You have to use a paper towel. You have to unload this paint out of that tool head. In this case, it's a sponge versus a brush. And then when you apply it to the plastic like this, you know, you're just dabbing it in the shapes. The first layers are kind of your general overall shapes. They're going to be the largest marks you make, and they're very translucent, they're very thin. I'm not trying to overwhelm the model at this stage. I want to kind of just get something going here and get a general light tone underneath of an older age rust is really how this set is designed to be used. And they're just quick little, you know, jabs. You're not trying to crush it or anything like that. This is a relatively delicate operation. You know, and if you've never done something like this before, then pick up some of the sprue parts, you know, some of the runners, and you can do this on a runner just to see how this works if you've never done it. I recommend you doing a little bit of a practice first if you've never used this kind of a process. But then from there, what you do is you begin to slowly build up your opacity. And this is the trick to it. You don't want to go all in with the rust out of the gate. Build up in thin, translucent layers like this. You'll have a much more successful, realistic end result at the end of the day. Paints do dry pretty quickly, which is a beautiful part of how this worked. The Life Color acrylic set, like I said, it's got extra pigments. It does really replicate a rusted metal conversation, you know, rusted steel and iron conversation quite nicely. So then from there, as those lower layers start to dry and build in kind of the shapes and where you want this to go, now you get your sponges loaded up with the next colors, and you go in order, light to dark, and less and less and less paint. So that means a drier and drier and drier sponge. So the first layer is a little bit slightly wetter. That orange layer is also just a smidge kind of wet a little bit. And then as you get into the real rust tones here, some of the areas of the arm are difficult to get with the sponge. So I switched to a brush here to kind of help it along a little bit. But you can see here as the rust starts to build up, it's beginning to really kind of gravitate towards its end result. And you're still a long ways away from where it's going to end up at this point in time. So patience is also part of this conversation. Following through on the full layers and doing the full process properly is part of this conversation. So what's happening here is, again, each layer is progressively drier, progressively darker, more opaque. And that you can see how the yellows and oranges are still there and still visible. So that conversation is really critical to building up this type of additive rust layered chipping. But that's the first kind of general process with this additive weathering, if you will. The next is going to be the OPR, and I'm going to show you a little bit of the brushes here, the original golds from King Art. If you're unfamiliar, I do recommend them. The link is in the description down below. We're an affiliate member of King Art. We do get a little bit of extra, which helps support the page. But the brushes themselves are brilliant for this type of work that we do in the hobby. They hold up really well. They have a great range of tips and sizes. When we start out with OPR, and you guys have heard this quite a few times now, new and old, understand the first few times you sit down with your weathering, to start the weathering, the conversation of getting going is always a little bit of a hesitation. So I do recommend, for those of you in the learning curve, trying to really get good at this, start with the light to dark program. I've talked about this many times. The reason is what we're trying to do with weathering. Weathering is a snapshot in time of the age of the vehicle. So the machine, in whatever it is going to go through a series of uses, whether it's combat or in this case kind of civilian, warehouse type work. Start with the light tones first, because this will give you the older effects or the older weathered stuff that happened previously over time. And then as you blend them in, you focus in on kind of the patterns that we're dealing with, because that's what the chipping was doing, is it giving us a location, if you will. And then you're using the other details on the model to kind of fill in the blanks. So once you get your first kind of light layers down, and light meaning in this case is kind of just an industrial dust colorway, kind of a light tan, gray color, if you will, and then we're gonna go right into just a little bit darker, greasier tones. Similar, everything you'll see here is you can go outside and look at a bulldozer, look at a crane, an excavator, forklifts, same thing. It's just the general simple context of a light to dark conversation between kind of a dust into kind of the greasier, maintenance-based, grime tones that happen on machines of this nature. And anything that moves like this is going to require maintenance at some point in time. Pistons, hydraulics, joints, anything like that's going to move around and require that kind of lubrication because it's metal on metal, et cetera, et cetera. So those all need to be taken care of, which is what you're doing here. So you've got an older, rusted part, because that is worn off paint that we'll see in construction equipment all the time when the manipulators or the cutter heads are all in contact, so they become fresh steel that oxidizes. That's basically what we're doing here. And then we're coming in and we're just showcasing. Same thing what would happen, on a Caterpillar, is just where it moves and does its thing, it needs lubrication. And oftentimes those rubber seals will leak out or bleed, or the crews themselves aren't concerned with aesthetics, and that's good for us model builders because that lets us get real juicy with some of this stuff. And then from there, once we've started to really get into this and we've started to really get warmed up, if you will, 15, 20, 30 minutes into a session, remember we're working section by section. I'm only concerned with the lower part of this arm right now. I'm not concerned with the shoulder. I'm not concerned with that upper joint right now. I need to solve all the problems on the model in this small section first. It's way easier to manage. It's far more rewarding because I can see exactly what's going to happen to this model when I apply this series of colors in this manner. So what that does is that calms my brain down as a model builder while I'm doing this in a quick amount of time. Like I said, 15, 20, 30 minutes. I'm already into the mode of I know what this machine's going to look like. I'm feeling good about it. That's a real positive affirmation of the process. So that type of scenario is really the side benefit of oil paints in particular. It really allows us to develop this piece in an individualistic and original way that is telling the story of the machine. The viewers will pick up on this right away when they see this kind of stuff. And so this is the strength of OPR. It's manageable. It's a session by session, revolving around a section by section, which is very manageable for us to do with the real world when we have our life and our family to deal with and stuff like this. So you get stuff accomplished, you can check it out, you can put it aside, you can move on to the next section. In this case, we'll move into the legs. And I've got the left leg there to review, shows me what I need to do. So my history is already there. I've already done the hard work. All I really have to do is just kind of transfer that work over to the other leg. And it's pretty simple. We start the same way we did with the arm, light to dark. And I keep telling you guys this to reinforce it, but it's really learn this process first. And then from there, you can manipulate out however you want to do that. Because with weathering, we always have to keep in mind the age conversation, the time length conversation. Especially in the mecha world where the predominance of these machines are around for a while, at least in canon, at least in the manga and the story arcs of what these are supposed to be, are oftentimes used for a very long period of time, at least comparatively speaking to, say, World War II, for example, where you're chewing through machines in weeks and months worth of time. So this is much more of a peacetime and or longevity conversation, which means that aged weathering, you can have more levels of depth in conversations with that as the model builder, as the author. There's no one to say you can't do that. You know, it's obviously fantasy, but there's no right or wrong here. So build in that age to this. That's why light to dark is so critical. It gives you that older stuff that happened a couple of months ago, or stuff that's been on there for a long, long time because the machine never gets washed. That's what we're doing here. And then we're going to build into that level the layers of the darker grease and grimes. And it is very much similar to, and I'll use a term some of you may not be familiar, but those of you that are, you'll understand it's very similar to the mapping conversation, where think of this like a topographical map. The base of the mountain when looking from above is your lighter base areas. They're going to be your larger volume on the model. And then as you get towards the peak of that mountain on the map, you get darker and darker, more condensed lines. Same thing here. See how that light still shows up around that hip joint? Even though I'm applying a pretty wet, dark, kind of leaky grease in there, but I'm leaving just a little bit of that lighter tone underneath visible. That's the layering process, and that's the building of the age process. That's why it's light to dark. So in other words, what I really like you guys to try to do is just absorb this. It's manipulatable, so don't feel like it's a hard black and white conversation. You know, your lights can be middle range tones to begin with. You know, that conversation too exists. It doesn't always have to be like a light dust. So it's going to depend on your machine. It's going to depend on your scenario. You can play your colors up depending on whether it's inside of a cargo vessel or freighter or a drop ship, or it's on a space colony, or it's on some other planet, etc., etc. So play your colors up however you like. I'm just using basic general planet Earth tones because it's just a really simple, easy way to describe this. We all understand it. I'm not trying to reinvent the wheel here. So again, these Mechatro kits are brilliant for this. I do highly recommend, and they do the other line of the Chubu kits as well. And I'd say if you've never really, if you're from Gunpla in particular, or say you come from the clean side and you've never done a build, a weathered build, honestly pick these up. You don't have to paint them. They're snap fit just like Bandai. Boom, done, get going. Like I said, I put a clear primer down and a matte coat on top. That's 5 minutes. You're out the door and you're off and running. That's how enjoyable this process was. And those of you on the streams, if you remember, this is a really fun project to do. And there's 2 of them in the thing, so you have a backup and or a partner. And we'll get to the blue one. It's 2 opposite colorways in each box, and I think they have, at this point in time of the video, there's probably close to 24 variations of the Mechatro, and there's also larger ones in 20 scale as well for you guys if you want to do some bigger models, you know, maybe playing a machining Kringer crossover vibe, if you will. But I tell you what, you got to speckle. If you ain't speckling, coach is going to come down on you hard. So speckling and the more I use it, the more I talk about it, the more it basically reinforces to me how brilliant speckling in this kind of really controlled, slight flick of the brush against some other object kind of process is. Because what we're doing here to the age thing again is you're adding in little nuanced little spots everywhere. And this is what we see in the real world, because Mother Nature and weather in and of itself, the environment will impart moisture onto machines of all various kinds, even in the desert. And even when the machine moves, its lubrication will flick out and splatter around and things of this nature. And that's what we're doing, getting a little subtle. It's really hard to do with the brush if you're touching a model. So the speckling flicks and that kind of splatter effect, that gives you that powerful control as a model builder. You know, this is really hard to do any other way and or as efficiently. This is hyper fast. It goes really quick. You can change colors on the fly like you're seeing here, from a light to a dark. So I put some light dust specs down, put some dark ones down. Then you come in with your blenders and your application and you continue on. It gives you, it kind of provides a canvas for you, if you will, an automatic random canvas, which is a beautiful little thing. Super easy to do. One of my favorites. So yeah, definitely jump on the speckle train. That's a bumper sticker, by the way, coming 2023. So when we build up, especially with the construction type equipment machine like this, one of the fun parts of it is you can get pretty, like I said, you can get pretty juicy with this. Armor gets a bit of this, but construction equipment in general, civilian stuff, railroader guys, stuff like this, you get to play with these kind of effects a lot more than other realms and other genres do. So I'm trying to take advantage of it here, and as you can see, I'm really trying to play up a bit of color theory with the green almost being more of a warm shade, and then that pale baby blue kind of a cooler tone, and then I'm putting in this kind of warm black brown grease over this kind of pale sandy dust color. I'm kind of playing up my colors a little bit while letting that orange foot kind of pull in some other kind of warm vibes into the piece in and of itself in a color theory conversation. So at this point in time, I'm actually trying to be a pretty smart author, you know, storyteller with the model, what's going on, but I'm using the colors to my advantage. That black, that really dark blacky grease, brown grease really pops against that baby blue. This kind of thing really pulls this machine off in terms of selling that story to you guys, to the viewer. And we didn't even get into rusting. You know, there's a whole conversation, there's a whole conversation about, besides the manipulator arms and the rusting of that stuff, but of putting rust chips onto this other areas as well. And in teachable conversation, I'm really just trying to showcase, you know, right to left leg, checking myself, making sure the work is consistent and original side to side, asymmetrical side to side, but relative side to side. And you can see how nicely that all comes out in the day, and you get nice controlled streaks. They'll ultimately dry bone matte, so if you want a little bit of a sheen to it, you can throw a little bit of linseed oil in there, and or some other kind of oils. You can use a safflower oil. It'll stay moist looking for a couple months for sure. Or you can use some of the gloss varnishes if you want to go that route as well. But then checking back on my work for the previous arm, the left arm, and then comparing it to the right arm, I just want to make sure that I'm happy with the work at this point in time. It's always a good idea to cross-check yourself, continue back and forth. And remember, these are tiny 35th scale parts. We're zooming way in heavily. So to the naked eye, really happy with the work, how this comes out. The process is really controllable. It's still relatively early days of the model, believe it or not, but each section is kind of slowly getting done. Mecha is its own thing, and I look forward to the next video with you guys, and we'll continue on. Thank you for your support. Have a good one.